first while we do
Right.
that, and here we go. Welcome, welcome.
Hi,
Wonderful to see
everybody.
folks. We're gonna be admitting people for a few more moments here this afternoon as we welcome special guest chef Michael Twitty. We are
Hi,
so
everybody.
lucky to be here with Michael this afternoon. Award-winning author, award-winning chef, um, just an incredible opportunity to hear from him today with Congregation Kol Ami here in West Hollywood, California. You know that part already, probably because you're with us. But if you are new to Kol Ami, welcome. We're so happy to welcome you. And I see some new names to my eyes, so I'm so glad about that. We are, as has been our custom here online, we're going to give another couple of moments for folks to log in because it does sometimes take some time to connect before we begin. You are muted. That is intentional. We want to make sure we can hear Michael and moderate a wonderful program this afternoon. But please direct your questions to the chat. I'll be here to help monitor the chat, help make sure our voices are heard that way. And as Renee, thank you, Renee, from Ohabe Shalom in Nashville. You can say who you are and where you're from in the chat. That's a great way to start getting to know each other right now while we admit a few more folks from the waiting room.
Wonderful. Beautiful. Okay, we got a few more connecting through their audio. Fantastic.
We've got Nashville, we've got Seattle here today in West Hollywood, or virtually in West Hollywood, I should say.
A little bit of Long Beach. Yeah, I'm in San Fernando Valley. All right, Quebec, Canada. Fantastic. Franklin, North Carolina. New Hampshire, Camarillo. We got really all over, really international already now. Huh?
Cincinnati, yeah, wow, wonderful.
Peoria, Illinois, Savannah, Georgia, Madison, Athens. Okay, Athens, Georgia. Carson City, Nevada, Claremont. Really a wide-ranging group. Oh, hey, Rockville, Maryland. Huge Michael Twitty fan. Michael,
Rob.
we got
Yay.
we got a lot of yours. No, I'm not the only fangirl here. It seems like a lot of folks. Well, we're going to go ahead. It's now 4:06 Pacific time. So welcome everybody. Congregation Kol Ami in West Hollywood, California, and we are thrilled to welcome the amazing and talented Michael Twitty to this Zoom space and to our community. And we're so glad you could be with us this afternoon. For those of you that know, Michael is a culinary historian and food writer. He's not just a chef. His really has an expertise that goes way beyond just cooking. He's from the Washington, D.C. area. He blogs, if you don't know, I'll put it in the chat in a minute, at afroculinaria.com. He's appeared many times. You've seen him on Bizarre Foods America with Andrew Zimmerman and Many Rivers to Cross with Henry Louis Gates. And most recently, Taste the Nation with top chefs Padma Lakshmi. And that was such a great show. HarperCollins released his Twitty's The Cooking Gene in 2017, tracing his ancestry through the foods of Africa to America from slavery to freedom. It was a finalist for the Kirkus Prize and the Art of Eating Prize, and third place winner in Barnes and Noble's Discover New Writers Award in Nonfiction. And his book, The Cooking Gene, won the James Beard Award for Best Writing as well as Book of the Year, making him the first Black author so awarded. His piece on visiting Ghana in Bon Appetit was included in Best Food Writing in 2019 and was nominated for a 2019 James Beard Award. We are just so thrilled, Michael, that you are with us today. Teach us as we celebrate together. Welcome.
Thank you so much. This is a real treat for me because I rarely get uh, to speak as a gay man, as a queer person, especially in the realm of being Jewish. And I really want to thank you and thank you everyone who's here for honoring the totality of who I am. That is one of the parts of what I do as an intersectional person. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I think the biggest takeaway of the horror of the past 4 years is that we are all intersectional in some way. So when we hear intersectional, some of us have been made to be afraid of difference, of the other, of those who are marginalized, of those who are oppressed, and made to think that someone who has multiple parts of themselves and acknowledges them, somehow something's wrong with them. You know, I didn't get a lot of hate mail the past couple years, but two parts in particular, two little messages that I got. One was from another African American man who basically called me crazy. No disrespect to mental health issues there, for expressing all these identities. I didn't know who I was. Like I was just too many things and too many things were going on, and I shut that down fast. Because it's one thing a queen knows how to do is how to read somebody, because reading is fundamental. But the other part of it is that some horrible like person who had like Andrew Jackson and a MAGA hat as their picture. I'm sure that picture looks way better than they did. Um, Said to me that I should take my perversity back to Africa or Israel. And I just said, thank you for acknowledging me as being Jewish without questioning my Jewish identity. Great. I really appreciate it. Big hugs. And that's how you deal with these fools. But we just have to start off by saying that there are those of us who have these master identities, crisscrossing, crossroads, border crossing, and then there's everyday people. And we have to acknowledge that our gene pool, our words that we use, the foods that we eat, the cultural artifacts of our lives are a product of crisscrossing, wars, trade, pleasant exchange, people sitting down at the same table to eat. All different forms of us basically becoming part of each other's lives and having multiple identities. So everybody in that sense has a part of what we call intersectionality. And it's so critical to acknowledge that we are happily cross-contaminated with each other's cultures and worldviews. And part of being a responsible citizen in a multicultural society is getting to know your neighbor. You cannot love thy neighbor as thyself if you don't know your neighbor. And you also have to know yourself. This is the most elemental Torah. And if you know, I do believe there's an interesting intersection of spiritual intersection between traditional African spiritualities and Judaism. The idea that if you do believe in some of the supernatural or metaphysical part of it, that we choose ourselves in heaven. We choose these paths. That's a mind-boggling philosophy, isn't it? Because it that's the traumas and the tragedies and the bad stuff too. I want to jump into that body and I'm going to live that life because I want to learn something or teach the world something. But it's a nice place for me because it means that if I chose this, I hit the jackpot. You know, and I'm going to include in that being a person of size. We call us big boys and girls these days. Us bears, us, you know, Black gay Jewish bears, all 150 of them. I don't care. I really don't care. I know that I am niche, but I also know that I'm not that niche, and that's another thing about it too. I'm currently working on my second book, Kosher Soul. And all of my books, this first trilogy of books that I'm doing on identity and food are kind of like wrapping in the idea that you can't separate one part of these identities out from the other and still tell a food story. Food stories, I want to push the envelope. We have a lot of cookbooks. And if you want a recipe, ladies and gentlemen, you can Google it. that ain't a problem. And if you're really creative, you can fiddle with them. And I do that all the time. That's how I do my work. But what I'm getting at is that we need to kind of come to a place with food, and especially when it comes to non-Eurocentric voices. And I'm including in that the realm of Jewish cuisine, Jewish foods, and Jewish food is global, to talk about what the food means. I know some people, they get online, they go to a food blog, and they want a recipe. They don't want the whole, like, I was traveling in southern France. Well, you got to understand that wasn't written for you. That was written for the person for whom, the four walls of their house is all they got. It's not written for somebody who just wants a recipe and wants to, make a weeknight dinner. But since I've clued you in on that, I think it's really important to tell the stories about food and about people. It's a mnemonic device. It's one of the ways in which we create memory. And as Jews, those of us who are Jews on this Zoom, we understand that food is one of the most powerful ways to create memories. Think about Seder. Seder is my favorite thing, my absolute favorite thing. I know some of y'all be like, on the 7th or 8th day, y'all be like, okay, you know what? I'm done with this constipation thing. I'm over it. I want a burger, no more matzah. And I get that, I feel you. But on those first 2 days, and even if I was to ever live in Yerushalayim, I said I'd always have two Sederim, because I love it that much. And and in the years when I've been able to have people over, I always hold a sort of like my own Black Jewish relations Seder towards the end of the holiday, preferably on one of the final kind of like two days or so. And one of the things that I do is I have my own special African American Seder plate along with the traditional Seder plate. If you want to see what that Seder plate looks like, you can go on my blog, as Rabbi Egger said, or you can go to Instagram, where I often get myself in trouble for being intersectional. And you can see the African American Seder plate. Here's the thing. These Passover Seder, other examples, telling stories through food is really critical. It's a way of capturing memory and capturing stories. And it's interesting how when I try to talk to people about what it means to be Black and Jewish and gay, we have the same sort of elements. I'm trying to figure out which story to anchor myself with here. Well, I'm going to start with this one. And it's the beginning of Kosher Soul. And I was on a bus way back when, going to my home synagogue, which is Sephardic. And may Rav know, because this is the number 5 bus in Rockville, Maryland. And I'm heading to shul, and there's this guy, and okay, my Jewish star goes up, his Jewish star goes up. We start talking. He's got a basket of vegetables. He's going from his co-op to whatever. And he's asking me, by that time, I was like the chocolate tevya. I was seriously like, I had the fedora, I had the whole outfit. I wore my tzitzis out, the whole thing. And he says to me, so yeah, how's all this going for you? And I said, okay, so far, I guess, meaning being Jewish and everything else, long time ago. And he said to me something very profound, which I took in, not with a grain of salt, but with a loaf of bread and a lot of respect and stride. And he said, being Jewish is, you'll know when everything is what it's supposed to be. When you're around your people, you can't stand them, but you got to be with them, and you got to endure with them. That's how you know this is really your path. And I said, I guess so. And because I knew what he was talking about, So I explained Black, gay, and Jewish as they get on my damn nerves, all of them, all the time, but they're my people. I got to stick with them. I have to love them for their faults and all, endure with them, because that's what we do. That's how we've survived as outliers, as minorities in this society. They're problematic. They're gonna get on your nerves. They're gonna cuss at each other, fuss at each other. But you gotta keep your cool and just keep going on. And that's what I do. And besides, when I cook and I make people food and they sit down at my table and they eat, they shut up so they can't say anything stupid to each other. They just keep chewing, just keep chewing, keep going, keep chewing, and also keep telling. We have to remember we have some of the same arsenal, spiritual, social, cultural arsenals. Our satire, which even enters our food, our sense of humor, our sense of deep, profound tragedy and trauma that walks with us. But also just the fact that we can laugh at it too. You know, if you're Black and from the South, you have had at least one chitlin experience. Chitlins are the small intestine of the hog. Okay, we're already on the wrong page, aren't we? Now, if you are, particularly if you're Ashkenazi Jewish, and even if you're not, you've been to some kind of pan-Jewish function, you have experienced the horror known as gefilte fish from a jar. Now, these two things have cultural parallels. You're gonna hear the same conversation with different plug-in. It's like one of those write-in things you give your children. They make a story, and you just plug in the different words. What the kid will always ask the question, why is this food different from all other foods? Why we got to eat this? The elder will always say, well, back when we were blank, so-and-so we all had this to eat blank. So now you got to eat it blank. So just shut up and eat it blank. That's it. Say it's the same story no matter what community that you're in. And one thing I find is very profound about gay brunch, Black Sunday dinner, and Jewish Friday night dinner is that we eat and we talk not about the food that we're eating, but the food that we had before or the food that we're going to eat. We never actually talk about the food we're eating in front of us. The constant conversation. And I might say about the gefilte fish and the chitlins is that here's the deal. When you go through this nonsense of why do I have to eat this, and you get told, because back in our history, we had to blank, blank, blank. You also have the parallel experience of eat this. It's nasty. So you ask the question of your Black, Jewish, or gay friend or parent or family member, why do I want to eat that? Why do I have to eat my oppression? Could you please? No, you have to try it. It's horrible. Like, why do I have to eat this horrible thing? And I just thought that's something about us is that we want to test the boundaries of how much we can deal with, how much we can take. And that's why I think we have yet to, we're going to spend some time as these multiple identities and communities is processing what we've just been through. I'm not going to really go into that. That's not why I'm here. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself in a minute, but I want to put that out there that we have a lot of processing to do of some things that we've been through. Not just this past year, which was interesting, but the stuff before it. We're not going to be able to move on until we take the time. And that's why Kosher Soul has taken such a long time to put out. Can you imagine that book coming out last year without any reference to what was going on? Or the fact that we've had so many flashpoints when it comes to issues of race, religion, identity, anti-Semitism, racism, etc. We didn't even have a Warnock and Ossoff yet. That has to go in the book because that's part of the bookend of all that's been going on with us and what we've been struggling through. So let me give you the quickest version of my story. And I want a lot of questions. We're going to do a lot of questions and answers this evening. Well, evening for me, afternoon for y'all out there in the lovely palm tree, Clamored West. I am 43 years old and I still look good because black don't crack. And on top of that, my dad is still here. My mom, blessed memory, is not. My mother and maternal grandmother were fantastic cooks. So was my father's mother. But I learned more from my mom's side. My grandparents came from Alabama on my mother's side and went up to the Midwest in the Great Migration and came to the East Coast. And my daddy's people were from Southern Virginia and the upcountry of South Carolina. My grandfather, blessed memory, Gonsley Twitty, lived to be almost 100 years old. He died in 2019. And he's one of the founders of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, which was a social justice and civil rights organization to help Black farmers. They successfully sued the United States government a couple years ago for subsidies and other things that were owed to Black farmers, but they did not receive, which ended up in denuding Black people of hundreds of thousands of acres of land. So the work that I do is not a direct descendant, but I come by it honestly in the fact that Granddaddy laid down a lot of things. I mean, somebody was born in Jim Crow South, who I was privileged to take with me to the Obama inauguration. I told people, I don't know if May Rob remembers this, but I would tell everybody, so I'm gonna get tickets. But I said, nah, it's hard to get tickets. My grandfather got them tickets. My grandfather said to me, he said, look, I know everybody in Congress. He was part of the state board, Democratic board in South Carolina. So I'm gonna find a way to get some tickets. And sure enough, that 90-something-year-old man got us some tickets to the Obama inauguration. So help me. And I cannot tell you, it was so profound that when we were on the way, I met up with him at the Metro. He came up from South Carolina overnight, and we were on the Metro, and we saw a lot of my students. I was teaching Hebrew school. I taught Hebrew school across 5 congregations for 15 years. That's why I got all these little gray hairs in my beard, because I taught 7th graders a lot. And y'all who've taught Hebrew school understand 7th grade Hebrew school. If anybody is on here who's part of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, please nominate me for not like seriously cutting a switch on these children all these years. Now these kids are grown and like, oh, Mr. Treat, remember me? I said, oh, I remember you all right. You the cause of this hair right here, this hair right here, all of them. But I saw my students and my grandfather. We're on the way to the inauguration of the first Black president of the United States of America. And that's already something my grandfather never thought he'd live to see. But on top of, but this is what got me. My grandfather said to me on the way, as we sat on the Metro, he said, I never thought I would live to see that one of my children or grandchildren would teach white kids. That they would go the same school. And it astounded him. I mean, I can't even tell you the education situation my grandfather grew up in. It was horrific. But like, it astounded him, and that they called me sir and mister. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized that in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., most of my students came from affluent communities. It dawned on me that I was the only Black teacher that many of them had. And if I was not the only Black teacher, I was certainly the only African American, someone born in the United States, and then and raised here. And then on top of that, for many of them, I was the only teacher of color they had, period. Hebrew school, regular school. And I didn't realize how profound it was that every single day I walked into those synagogues, I was making Black history and Jewish history. And I waited to come out to my students or be an out teacher. I will say this because if you remember the shall we say shameful introduction to Catch a Predator, that was in my community. So I was like, y'all ain't associating those two things together on my watch. And so that was a big deal. That was a very big deal. But when I did leave Beth Ami, the last day of my tenure there, I had a huge group of students in one room, and I just blurped it out, and it was funny because half the room goes, huh? And then half the room goes, I knew what was up. I knew something was up. Mm-hmm. And one of my students, Dana, did something really beautiful. She brought her guitar in and she played for me to Sir with Love to serenade me out of my tenure at Beth Ami. I did not expect that. And I was a bit of tears. But, you know, it's interesting being and it's not because I couldn't have been an out person in that community, because the cantor, Hazan there, was openly gay and married. But I felt that's what intersectionality comes into play, ladies and gentlemen, is that what's it like to be a Black male and be openly gay and be a teacher of children in communities where they don't know what to do with you in the first place. They don't understand certain things. The systemic realities of how come you don't have a car? Baby, I'm no, no, that's not how it works. I mean, now people are like, oh, people don't have cars. They can't go get shots in LA because they get to COVID vaccine. Yes, that's how it is for us. Those of us living in the shadows of systemic racism and economic deprivation. It sucks. And it's not so easy. You don't just get a car at 16 and run off in the world and do what you got to do and get a little money from mama and papa and all that stuff. Yes, you do have to go past McMansions on a bus that may or may not get you there on time. Yes, you do have to have employers and people. It was interesting how when I was teaching Hebrew school, all the people who hired me had profoundly intimate relationships with people of color. From one of my principals who grew up in the segregated South as a Jewish woman in Valdosta, Georgia, to another who had Black grandchildren, but also remember what it was like. She told me the story, what it was like to go to the movies in Baltimore and not understand why her friends couldn't sit in the same section as her. Very, this is why we as a Jewish community have to deal with and have to profoundly answer to the question of the color line in this country. I got a lot of requests during the Black Lives Matter movement took on national prominence after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Aubrey Davis, etc. And I kind of pushed back on a lot of people and I said, well, you know something? There were places where I taught where I was taken aside and said, why you gotta talk about that black white stuff all the time? That ain't our problem. I'm like, no, every time I walk in this door, it's your problem. Every time I walk in places in the Jewish community, mainstream places, and I get asked for 2 forms of ID or whatever and get patted down, it's your problem. And, I just told people, it's fascinating that you all want me to talk about this now. But when I was your teacher, when I was in your community, when your children saw how you talked to me, which wasn't always pleasant, I will say that I did have a lot of more positive than negative experiences. But when I had a negative experience, it was painful. I had one teacher, I'm not going to go through all of that because I want to talk more about my life and food. But I had one teacher who decided they were going to yell at me by my last name and not call me Mr. and tell me to get back here and do X, Y, and Z. And I said, what now? Excuse me? How's that working? They didn't get it. They didn't get that talking to me like the help. The way they would do no other teacher. I was a grown-ass man in my 30s. And to look at my students' faces and they knew what was up. They got the message that I was less than. So I say to people, before we get all trendy and get all up on this social justice stuff, examine what's going on in your community. How are you dealing with these issues in your community? Have people of color ever felt any sort of kind of way? And if they have, deal with it. Don't go overboard, but just deal with it and talk about it and be sincere about it. But if those things didn't kill me, the good things kept me alive. And for me, being a teacher was my entry to talking about food, because I was teaching about the Shoah in 7th grade, as we often do in Hebrew school. And I was concerned that my students, being in DC, you go to the museum, it's right there. They would go to the museum unprepared. And to them, it was just this horrifying video game that Jewish people and others had to live through. And for me, it was deeper than that. It was more profound. I said, well, we have to talk about these communities. We're living in these spaces for thousands of years, if not hundreds of years. So for me, it was like, okay, let's talk about the food. And so my good friend, now friend, Cara Da Silva, had a book she edited called In Memory's Kitchen, which was a translation of this cookbook that the women of Theresienstadt, Hitler's model ghetto, Theresen, did. And we started cooking from that. And we started to I started asking people to bring in recipes, because I wanted them to understand the people who survived the Shoah or perished in it were living human beings who had lives. They weren't just numbers. They weren't, and they had different languages and different communities, different countries they were part of, and they were loyal citizens who fought in wars for these countries. And these kids, these young women were modern day Yehudits who were risking everything to save their people and take up resistance, to take up arms. They, the way it was taught to me was not fulfilling of those lives. And so from that, after doing that for a year or two, I started to think to myself, how come no one's ever done this for people who were enslaved in America? And so my journey, you see me in the picture in front of the kitchen at Somerset Place in North Carolina, over 200-plus-year-old kitchen, was to do what that book did, which was tell the stories of marginalized, oppressed people who were victims of a bigger system, to talk about how they use food to overcome, how they use food to resist, how they use food to bring joy into their lives. Because our food, Jewish joy and Black joy and gay joy, is in food. And that's one of the things that I like to amplify, instead of just talking about the Shvet Yid kind of stuff, Oh God, it's hard to be a Jew, right? In Yiddish. And no, it's deeper than that. Going to Israel changed me a lot when it came to food. I was able to have, the last time I was there, which was, gosh, I have run a brain, but it wasn't that long ago. I was in Jerusalem, and I had the privilege of going to a meal prepared by Israeli, Arab, and Palestinian chefs for Claudia Roden. I mean, you don't want to be anywhere else but that table. And so it was just, I was sitting next to her, and she has this lovely British accent, and she's talking about her childhood in Egypt, and she's conversing in Arabic, Hebrew, French, and English all at the same time, different people, and explaining the foods. And I mean, I've never had a more profound meal, I think. But going to the shuk, going to Machne Yehuda, making brisket and black-eyed hummus for Israelis of all types is really stressful. Because, and then it was I made peace by I made the Palestinians, the Israeli Arabs, the Israeli Jews, and American Jews all unify on one thing. What the hell is this Black guy come from America making hummus for us for? What's going on with this? It was so funny. I mean, I was laughing and crying and sweating then, and I'm still laughing, crying, and sweating after, because I was just like, okay, hummus, you gonna make what? So it was really hilarious. But they enjoyed it. And I got to see just how, like, testosterone driven, shall we say, making hummus is in the cultures of the Middle East. Having said all this, I'm gonna just say two quick things, and Rabbi, I think we need to do our little dialogue and questions and answers. One of which is, when it comes to Jewish food, I'm gonna answer one of your favorite questions off the bat. My favorite Jewish foods are Moroccan cigars and kasha varnishkas. To me, that is like the ultimate Jewish soul food. And it's because, like, I mean, matzo ball soup is really good and it's cool and everything, but that's like a thumbprint, a fingerprint, Gribbinus is delicious, but it will kill you. So I've decided I can only have Gribbinus one time every decade. So I don't know how many I got left, but if I ever think if I'm an elder and that's towards the end, I'm probably gonna do Gribbinus more than once a decade, I guess. Brisket, of course, that's great. All of that good stuff, but kasha varnish is just lovely, and Moroccan cigars and boreka. Just, I got everybody covered on that part. And if I have to go even further with this, I would have to say kuresh sabzi, because Iranian stuff. Yes, the way that Iranian Jews make this is so that's great. African American Southern food. I'm not even gonna surprise you. I don't care if I'm stereotypical. I really don't. I don't care. My grandmother's fried chicken is the last thing you want to eat and the first thing you want to eat. I'm blessed and unfortunate that I was part of that last generation to really be around those elders and absorb from them. and ask a lot of questions and really embody. So for me, that's one. My daddy and mom's barbecue, which I've perfectly kosherized, to lamb, beef, chicken, etc. Just, and I can make you Hazer too. I just won't eat it, but I can make it. But I know what it's supposed to taste like and look like. So I know, and when it's done, so I can make you that and eat just fine. But also, I've only recently have I really begun to appreciate as an adult. I guess the past 10, 15 years, fresh collards and the way our southern way with vegetables. I think it's a misnomer that it's all fat and grease and nonsense. No, there's a subtlety there. And if you come up with the right folks, and red rice, that is like, my grandmother made perfect red rice, and that was part of our deep heritage from Africa. A lot of it is. That's part of my work. But I want those foods to tell stories. Now, the last thing I'll say before we go Q&A is that I've become known for kosher soul food, but I have to say something. In writing this book, I've discovered a really uncomfortable truth, which is most people don't actually fuse the two. There have been fusions of these foodways, and it comes from the fact that particularly when Ashkenazi Jews went to the South. Now, there were Sephardic Jews in the South too, but those two food traditions were so similar in ingredients: rice, leafy greens, hot peppers, polenta mamaliga grits, okra, bamia, lobia, black-eyed peas. They didn't mix the two. So when Black folks worked in those houses and worked for those restaurants, those two things never came. But when Ashkenazi Jews learned they could put like hot pepper in their food, it was like, oh, we all for it. So there was like so if you've ever heard of Dr. Marcy Cohen Ferris, who is a great mentor and friend of mine, matzo ball gumbo, that's no joke. There was a whole tradition in the Deep South of mixing African-American soul and Creole food with Ashkenazi Jewish food. And it's a whole dissertation to talk about it. But it's interesting that, I do that in my household of mixing all of the Jewish diaspora and African diaspora, Caribbean, India, Poland, Morocco, China, Ethiopia, whatever, with the African Atlantic and beyond, and Southern. But what's so profound and interesting is that throughout my recent food career, I've had a lot of white Southerners who've converted to Judaism come to me and ask me, how do I do this? Because this is the most important thing to me, is how we as Southerners eat. But most Black American Jews are like, we keep the two things separate. So there's very few people have talked to me about mixing the food. They may make soul food kosher, or they may make traditional Jewish foods, but they don't mix the two like I do. I play with it, everything, throw it up in the air. And then other times I make foods that I'm a stickler for making something exactly as it came out of Hungary, exactly as it came out of Germany, exactly as it came out of Tunisia, etc. And that's the food historian in me. But one of the big bonds between me and white Southerners who have converted to Judaism is just like, we both have this is the thing that we cannot play with too much. How do I do this without playing with it too much? How do I organize my kitchen? How do I organize it? And then of course, on the last note, I keep on saying that, right? The kitchen has become for me this incredible playground. I see a comment about the cross-contamination. And it's like, I realized when I was finally organizing my kitchen instead of it being a big old mess, balagan, I was like, wow, I have rose water, and I have preserved lemons, and I have shav, and I have Ostim chicken bouillon, the seasoned salt of the Jews, and I have there you go, Rabbi Max, and I have all these foods in here alongside like strawberry butter from Georgia, and peach jam, and hot sauce from every southern state, and gumbo filet powder, and Stuff I bought in when I was in West Africa. I've been at West Africa 7 times to 8 countries. And it's like, I love the fact that and then of course we're American, so we have to have sriracha and we have to have hoisin sauce, and I have to have my vegetarian oyster sauce. That's one of my most prized possessions, because oyster sauce is the jam, but not in the culture kitchen, so you do vegetable oyster sauce. And just the fact that, you know, my extended family is African American, Puerto Rican, Vietnamese, white, black, everybody in between, and for us to come together and cook, especially those of us Gen X and younger, and be in that kitchen all together. This is the America that we've been promised. And if we want to live in it, we have to make sure that that is a legacy that we pass on. And as Jews, we know how to do this. Hi, Ella, how are you? Today, y'all have to say hi to Ella real quick, because Ella Levinson helped me put together the cooking gene and do some things. So I still have by the way, I still have the bear, the chef bear. He's like my best friend. I'm keeping away from my blind dog so he doesn't chew it up. So I guess that's my message this evening.
Michael, this is like amazing. And so you've given up, like, there's so many things. Speaking as a Southern Jew, I'm from Memphis. So I really appreciate so much this conversation about the intersection, not only of our many identities, but in this case, the intersection of the Jewish food and Southern and slash or soul food, not always the same, as we know, but yes, like that intersection, and that food expresses so much parts of our different identities. And I think you've captured for us today a little bit about, you know, expressing that. And I was really taken with your phrase today when you talk about eating our oppression. Of course, that is what we do on Pesach, on Passover, when we eat the maror, when you eat the bitter herbs, you know, that you're eating the bitterness of slavery, literally eating your oppression and eating it away. Maybe it's why there's so many Jews in OA, you know, Overeaters Anonymous, and because it's like part of our tradition, right, to eat our oppression away. Could you maybe say another word more about how this comes out, particularly in the African tradition of African heritage foods that you've been so beautifully and talking about and teaching us all about?
Well, you know, there's a lot of it's conceptual. Unfortunately, one of the bylines people get about soul food is that soul food was created when some mean white guy threw some food at black people back in slavery time. They do a delicacy. That's not how it happened, like at all. You know, soul food, in fact, is not the food of our enslaved ancestors. Soul food is the memory cuisine of the great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren of the enslaved. So what happens the same time that, say, for example, Jews in the Northeast or Italians in cities around the country, or Armenians, have their second and third generation, and what you define as your people's food is usually the good stuff, right? The comfort food, the tasty stuff. It's not the everyday. We don't realize we've lost thousands of recipes in the everyday from almost all of these cultures, because that's the stuff that was actually good for us, healthy for us, sustained us. But we eat the food that's the celebratory food. And it was also the reason why is because, guess what? Life in those tenements and ghettos and barrios sucked. So when you did have 2 dimes to rub together, you created food and you went to places where you could eat food that gave you a sense of pleasure and joy, as opposed to reinforcing oppression. Now it's funny because when you go to West Africa, food is food. Food is not good nor it's bad. You just, when you're hungry, you eat. If you can eat, that's good. And you learn a very different response to consumption than you do here in the West. I'm doing this thing where I'm just like looking across the questions. Someone asked me about a recipe for black eyed pea hummus. It's on, I believe, if it's not on the blog, I can get it to you guys. You can disseminate it. That's fine. It's been out there. It's in the book as well. It's in the cooking gene as well. But I mean, yeah, Rabbi, it's something. It's I remember growing up being taught this doesn't have to taste good. But it does have to make you feel full. That's a very profound thing. And I didn't get it because when you're younger, of course it should taste good. Of course it should be good for you, make you happy. But when you're older and you learn that that comes out of a culture of economic deprivation, it comes out of a lot of different levels, and it's also there to teach you something, like a memory lesson. I talk about in the cooking gene how my father took me when we went on one of our trips to the country. We didn't call it going out; we called it going to the country. And my father, I was running my mouth as I usually love to do, and my father's watching me talk. And in our culture, Black culture, looking someone directly in the eyes is not you gotta have a reason for that. So my father looks me directly in the eyes. I'm kind of hypnotized because we rarely made eye contact. And all of a sudden, as I'm running my mouth, my father pops in this pebble-sized piece of red clay that melted on my tongue. Like, I literally was like, first time I cussed at my father. And I said, what the hell did you do that for? And my father said to me, I want you to eat some clay. And I'm like, are we really doing that Southerners eat dirt thing? Is it? Yeah. And the father told me, he said, back in the day, you didn't have no vitamins. A lot of people were iron deficient. And so that day I ate a pebble-sized piece of pure Virginia red clay. And I've never done it since. But my father is laughing at me as I'm like choking down his clay, and he goes, tastes like chocolate, don't it? So yeah, this is it's an important, sometimes not everything's gonna taste good or should be good, But rabbis, I should say, that's like, I can teach the kids. The part of Jewish tradition that's so incredible is like when you read those parts for ceremonial purposes about the creating of the incense or waving the lulav and esrog. By the way, I'm very Afro-Ashkefardi, so you will hear me mix together a little Chabad with some Sfadi, with some Southern, with some African. You hear it, right? I just realized I said lulav and esrog as opposed to lulav and etrog. So sorry, Meirav. But yeah, it's like the ketoret, the incense it had to include 2 spices that didn't smell or taste good. And if you took them out, right? But it's there to teach us everybody matters, everything matters. The night and the day, death and life, the bad and the good, and the in-between, everything matters. And if you take it out, you are not experiencing the universe as Hashem created it. Mm-hmm.
Michael,
if you could teach, if you gave us a really important lesson about what the Jewish community should be doing and hasn't been doing. 2 things that you want everybody today to go back into the Jewish worlds that they are living in to advocate for and advocate on. What do you want us to walk away and be committed to doing today?
2 is 2 things. One would be that don't interrogate people based on any sort of thing about appearance. If you want to know about someone's Jewish journey, represent that energy yourself. And first get to know somebody's name. Not how come you're Jewish, not how come you're here. Remember synagogues have been complaining about membership and people leaving, going, coming since God was a boy. But the thing about it is that I've seen a lot of shul practices that I didn't like. And it's like, do you greet people? Do you really, or do you give them their space, but also welcome them? Are you, how are you doing? And for a lot of Jews of color, the first moment is when they get handed the prayer book at come to services. The hesitation, like we know when somebody's like that 2 to 5 seconds of just like, I don't know. That's me black talking, but you know what I mean. It's so devastating. I mean, I had one of my friends who was born black and Hasidic and multiple generations went to a shul while she was still in New York. And she was interrupted during Yom Kippur services because somebody wanted her to take someone out who was an older man. They assumed she was a nurse, even though she had a prayer book, was praying in the section of the Nashim section and all that stuff. She's very traditional, but they assumed that she was somebody's nurse. Mm. Or how about that young man who was a conservative sofer, and he was taking a Sefer Torah, and they were gonna beat him up because they thought he was robbing. I don't know about you, but I ain't never seen somebody have a spare Sefer Torah in their house for no reason. Yeah. So we have to be really aware of that and just know people's names. And if you want to know about somebody's Jewish journey, demonstrate that knowledge yourself. Hi, I'm Denise Egger. I'm a rabbi at Kol Ami in West Hollywood. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. This is my wife. This is my family story. I practice. This is where and then if they want to tell their story and their journey, great. If they don't, at that point, fine too. But those are things that we can do. Also, what do the pictures look like? What do the images look like? What are the stories we tell? It's not those Ethiopian Jews, it's when we were in Ethiopia, when we were in China, when we're in Brazil, we're in Mexico. Telling stories about Jews of different immigrant status. There are undocumented people who are Jewish in this country. And that's why undocumented folks, that's an issue. And asylum seekers is an issue, Jewish issue. And if it's good enough for those few Jews, good for everybody who has that problem. And also, I want people to understand this. This is so important. I got to take the 30 seconds to say it. A lot of people who have become problematic in terms of the relationship between American Jews and their neighbors are part of us. It's people who, they were their existence was challenged in days in which if you had a so-called mixed marriage, you were shunned or somebody said shiva. I didn't realize how deeply problematic some of the stuff that we went through with Alice Walker was, but also I reminded people, I said, but what was the personal experience that she and her ex-husband had that shaped some of these really problematic and hurtful things that she said? And we have to really talk about that as we go forward. But also one last thing, celebrate what Jews of color, and Jews of various sexual identities have brought to the Jewish world. What was the rabbis, who was the director of Trembling Before God?
Oh, Dubowski.
Yes, Simcha.
Simcha Dubowski, yeah.
Right. That movie really changed. I mean, I went to see it with the director, and Rabbi Steve was there too, and they were all there.
Rabbi Steve Greenberg.
Greenberg, yes.
And one of the main people covered in that movie was a founding member of Kol Ami, David Silverstein. And
wow.
His story of trying to deal with his very traditional family. His father was a chazan. The interaction with the Chabad rabbi in San Francisco. He's known to us and our Temple family.
Wow, wow. Things like that. You can't underestimate how those things profoundly impacted me and other people, because I converted with 3 Orthodox rabbis, and part of that was because I did not want to spend the rest of my existence as a Jew of color constantly being questioned. Yes. But at the same point in time, I will say that it's never really been a thing. People have never really talked about that with me. There's a question that I really want to get to. If we can hang on for a little bit, slightly longer, because I really want to handle this. 2 questions I really want to handle. How do you teach that all food shouldn't taste good to adults? That's really hard, because We Black folks and we Jewish folks are the world's biggest picky eaters. We really are. Or things have to be a certain way because we are mnemonic and memory driven cultures where if something is a certain way, it sticks that way, like forever, right? So you how do you do it? By challenging yourself, by doing, believe me, I have eaten some things in West Africa. I was like, oh Lord, like there's a particular ingredient called ogiri oru, and it's from the locust bean. It's fermented, and it's really like their soy, indigenous, but it's like a bitter sort of umami flavor. But dear God, che, when you using Nigerian pidgin, when you when you first approach this ingredient, which is kind of essential, especially Nigerian Ghana, it smells like gem socks that have been sitting in a locker for like 5 years. And you just have to deal with it. And you have to figure that out, play with that. So it's just to challenge yourself. And then another important question is, balancing intersectionality. This is really hard. I mean, it's a lifelong process. It's like running a gauntlet. And I often tell people who are like me, African American or of color, Jewish, sexual minority, LGBTQ. You have to think of your identities and the histories and the cultures and the work that has been done that's behind you. All those women, all those men, all those people who were non-binary, all those people of trans identity before there was a trans identity. Those people did a lot of work for you to be here. So what you have to do is think of the survival strategies and successes and joys as a toolbox that you then take. I mean, there's a lot of times when if I'm in a fix and I have a moment of like fight or flight, I have to ask myself, what would Harriet do? What would Rabbi Zisha do? What would James Baldwin do or Sylvester do? We'll put on a show, of course. Right? What would the Maiden of Lublin, the famous rabbi in Eastern Europe, or Asanath Barzani, the rabbi of what is Mizrahi community in Afghanistan or in Iran. What would these people who were outliers, who were challenged, what would Rashi's daughters do? What would, you're not the first person to deal with Isht, and you ain't gonna be the last. I was watching the documentary on streaming on Andre Leon Talley, famous African American fashion writer. And I'm thinking to myself, this man was born the same year as my mom. I used to watch him when I was a teenager. I've followed his career. And then he's the moment where he like really breaks down the hurt he's experienced despite all this fame and fabulousness he got to live. And I just looked at it and I looked at my husband and I said, not only was I not the first one to do this, I ain't gonna be the last, but the fact that he says, I dealt with this, I dealt with that. How did I get through it? Because of my faith and my ancestors. Look behind me. That's what my whole life and career is about. So when he said that, I was like, whatever happens from this moment forward, I can make it through, because guess what? I'm on the same program. I'm using the same tools. Audre Lorde, our one of our greatest lesbian poetesses and writers, talked about dismantling the master's house, but not with his tools. There are times when reading, y'all know what I mean by reading, gets me through something. And there are times when having a Yiddish cup gets me through something on the other side of things. And that's where the blessing comes in. That's where the bracha comes in. Because then you now know that no matter what people call you or think of you or whatever they do about you, you have a tool set that they couldn't dream of having. I know we're nearing the end of the hour, everybody, but there's something I really meant to say to you, and I'm trying to like work through my Rona brain, hook onto it. So if you'll indulge me for a hot second. It's one thing I used to tell my students. They used to ask, well, what's Jewish heaven like? And I said, well, that really depends on who you talk to and if they believe that, whatever. But I said, you want to know what traditional heaven is? I said, you're gonna be really disappointed. And I tell them, I said, okay, so one part of Jewish heaven is a banquet hall where we eat forever, which actually sounds pretty hellish to me, but even though I love to eat. But here's the good part: you get to eat. The food's really good. Trade food becomes kosher, supposedly, right? Right. That's the fun part, right? You can finally have that ham sandwich that you've already been having, but shh. But then you can. But Moses and Miriam will be entertaining you, and David Hamelech on his harp. You got a whole live band. There's this beautiful sukkah made of the skin of the Leviathan, which is iridescent like the rainbow, like the pride flag and trans flag, right? Which is what I'm wearing in my clothes right now, if you hadn't noticed. But the other room is a library where you get to study for all eternity, which makes me, that's two of my favorite things. But I am a gay man, sorry, Cole. But the other part of it is that there's a saying that talks about teaching that Hazal says that when you go into this yeshiva, there are all these prayer books, all these books, and I just and that even God, even she, even he, even it studies in this yeshiva. And I said to them, if you're a great scholar, you get called by your great work. Mishnah Torah, this is this, the Sfat Emes. But guess what? I want to be a cookbook. I want to be God's cookbook. Awesome. When God looks into those blueprints, those prayer books, when he, she, it looks into those books, the blueprint is us. The words in God's prayer book are the lives of Rabbi Chaikin, the lives of Rabbi Egger, the lives of Michael Twitty, the lives of all of us that God studies to make the creation even better. And if there's anything I want to be God's cookbook, and I want him to make a delicacy every day.
What a beautiful, what an amazing,
Amen.
beautiful thought. Michael, we are so indebted to you for being with us this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are. And we are waiting with bated breath for Kosher Soul. When do we have a time frame?
Because of the pandemic, it's spring 2022.
Okay, so we have another year to wait. In the meantime, the Cooking Gene, the link is in the chat. Please, if you haven't already bought it, you're in for a treat if you care about all of the things that we've talked about today. Again, thank you to Michael Twitty, to all of you for being here with us. If you would consider a donation in honor of Michael to continue to support these great free programs that we're providing during COVID. Next Sunday at 4 p.m., Glenn's here with us. Glenn Rosenblum, our master of Broadway, will teach another of his Broadway showstoppers on musical theater, titled Broadway Love for Valentine's Day. And please check out all of our programs, whether you're a member or you're just dropped in. We have so many great things happening online. kol-ami.org, kol-ami.org. I'm Rabbi Denise Eger, and on behalf of Rabbi Max Chaikin, thanks for being with us this afternoon. And Michael, bravo. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. This is wonderful. Be well, be safe.
You too. Be strong and be well, my friend.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.